All right. Today we're going to be talking about prioritizing objectives. Specifically, why this is so important and how can you at home prioritize your objectives? Like how can you actually ensure you have the right priorities in line? So why is this so important? Well, it is so important because how are you ever going to hit the mark? If you don't prioritize anything, and you can take this in parts of all areas of your life, like your to-do list, and trust me, I struggle with this daily, prioritizing my to-do list, but it's even more paramount when it comes to overarching objectives and goals, whether it's your own personal finance goals, your own personal career goals, your marriage goals, your family objectives and goals, what values you strive to raise your kids within, and so important when it comes to your land objectives and goals. Now, in my original academies and in my foundations courses, I talk about the why factor, and you've even heard me talk about it on these different podcasts, in my different blog articles, on different social medias about my why factor. I'm specifically talking about objectives. Now, objectives are the terms and the words that foresters use when strategizing and providing recommendations for your family forest lands, of course. So there are 5 different objectives. You have your timber income priorities, your wildlife, your recreation, your aesthetics, and your soil and water conservation. Those are pretty much your 5 different objectives, but you need again to make sure to prioritize them based on importance for you. And that list of priority needs to align with your why factor. So let's look back into, again, why is it so important that we do make prioritization a priority in these different things, whether it's your to-do list, but especially when it comes to your forest management objectives and goals? Well, let's look back at creation and prioritizing what your end goal is helps you create steps in the order that they need to be taken to get to that objective, to get to that goal. God could have just kind of went boom, doing everything at once, right? But instead, he takes his time. He does it in steps and processes. You got day 1, he creates light, just light. You got lightness and darkness. Day 2, he creates the vault between the waters. Day 3, he gathers the sky, he gathers the dry ground together, and on the dry ground, he allows plants and vegetation to start to grow. This is important for what I'm about to talk about. He does vegetation on day 3. Okay, we got light, we got sky, we got water, we got some ground now, we got some trees and plants growing. Okay, day 4, he's bringing in the stars and the sun and the moon to navigate by and to tell time and to again just provide some more light. Day 5, we have creatures starting to emerge, specifically water creatures and birds of the air. And day 6 is when the wild animals and mankind is officially made. And day 7, we know he rested to demonstrate to us the importance of rest. There is an order here. And now remember when I said pay attention and remember day 3 where he grows the plants? And it is 2 days later he creates the animals. Specifically, 3 days later after that, he creates mankind. He created plants 3 days before he put man in the Garden of Eden. Why? Well, what were the animals going to eat? What was mankind going to eat if there weren't plants first? This is just one example that really sticks out to me about how important it is to understand what your priority and end goal is. God's priority was to create man in his image, create this whole thing. He created the world, but he had to do things in a particular order. Well, he didn't have to, he's God. He chose to do things in a particular order to allow things to run most efficiently, allowing the plants and vegetation to grow up and be established first before you put in the world things that rely and are dependent on these plants and vegetations to survive. Maybe you don't agree with me, but to me, that kind of slaps across the face about how important it is to start with that end objective and goal in mind, and then come back and put the steps in between you need to make. Maybe you're not seeing it quite yet. I promise by the end of this podcast, you're going to see the importance of it, though. Making in prioritizing your objectives, making that list of what is most important is going to help reduce the temptations to do all things at all times on your property. And again, this is so important. I use wildlife as a basis for my examples. And when I'm talking about wildlife, I talk about the importance of being specific because you cannot meet the needs of all wildlife at the exact same time. A mature pine plantation does not provide the same habitat needs as a hardwood natural forest, upland natural, non-plantation style natural. And those two forest landscapes don't provide the same benefits as clear cuts and early successional habitats. They each meet the needs of different animals, either for different seasons and stages of life, for their different needs, or completely different animals altogether. So why would we think that we can make and meet all of our different goals and objectives at the same time? The truth is, when you have all objectives equal on a playing field, you will never be able to thrive in any one area. And that is where a lot of frustrations come into play with land ownership. That is also when you feel like you're running on that hamster wheel and you're running and running, you're making management decisions and you're doing work, and you're just trying to get action done, but your action doesn't have a purpose and therefore it's never really moving the needle in any way. It's just kind of staying there because it's getting pulled into all the different directions. Therefore, it makes no actual, real, tangible traction. And you feel like you're just bleeding money. You're wasting time. You feel frustrated that who you're working with doesn't know what they're doing, that the action you're taking. And that's when your land starts to slip from potential sustainability metrics and management and being perceived as a good investment and asset to the family to becoming a liability. Objectives that are equal in the playing field are never going to be able to be truly sustainable. Yeah, I know. That sucks, right? Because now it means you have to place priorities and you have to make those tough decisions because you want a sustainable forest, right? You want family land to be sustainable. Well, to do that, you have to have an order of what you're trying to meet. Now, I talked about in a previous podcast that, all these different objectives are biblical. So it doesn't really matter what order your objectives are. Now, if you ask me, I'm always going to say timber income should be your number one priority. Helps you keep your silvicultural exemptions. Helps keep financial sustainability top of mind. But in reality, your priorities don't really matter. But it is important for you to list them because that is how you're going to be able to take the most intentional action. That's how you're going to be able to see the needle move in reaching your vision and reaching your goals because now you're able to differentiate which action is the right action for you, which management advice and recommendations are the right plans for you to meet your goals, meet your expectations, and actually feel like you're doing something impactful. When you can do that, that's when you create true sustainability. The first lesson of the landowner steward is defining what sustainability is changing our mindset around what are these concepts of sustainability and understanding what are the three legs of that stool. And of course, in landowner steward, I talk about the financial parts, but here, prioritizing your objectives is how you create true sustainability. It's kind of like your umbrella metric where you're trying to aim the arrows at, right? And when you have a truly sustainable family forest, that's how you create continued value within the family. That's how it's going to be much more likely that forest, that land, is going to get passed on for the generations. Without this list and prioritization and making these objective priorities a priority, I know seems a little redundant, but you understand what I'm saying here. Without doing this, you're not going to be able to continue passing on through the generations because they're going to perceive it as a risk, a liability. They're not going to be nearly as ingrained in the value because they're going to have seen you running on this hamster wheel, chasing all these different temptations, trying to reach goals and never really reaching any of them, never really being successful in creating the end goal vision that you maybe had probably even talked about. So, what are they going to do? They're probably going to sell it. Not because maybe it's the best decision for them, just simply because they don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to manage it. They just don't want to handle it. Making the priorities is going to help you create that truly sustainable vision, that truly sustainable forest that will last through the generations. Is going to help reduce the temptations of doing all these different things, of chasing your hamster wheels, of running you ragged. And speaking of running ragged, let's talk about another example in scripture. Luke 10, verses 38 through 42. I've talked about this scripture piece before, and I know I've written about it in my Enrooted Wisdom devotional series, but I'm going to share it with you today because it is really striking to me about being tempted. Running on a hamster wheel doesn't always look like running on a hamster wheel. Like, it's easy to spot other people doing it, not so easy to spot within our own lives. And I'm going to talk about why this is in just a minute, okay? So let me read these verses 38 through 42. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to him teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. The thing that sticks out to me about Martha is this line here. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And Jesus tells her, you are anxious and troubled about many things. Now, in this scenario, it's because Martha had her priorities wrong. And that's essentially what Jesus tells her, says, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen, the right thing, and it won't be taken from her. When I relate this story to our land objectives and prioritizing our land objectives, so many of us are the Marthas, doing what we think is the right thing to do, serving. We believe that we are meant to, serve the household and serve our guests. And so we're running around distracted with all the different serving needs that we end up ignoring the guest completely. And because we are so obsessive about making sure we're being a good servant and being a good host, we put ourselves into this weird, awkward, anxious turmoil situation because we're worried about all the different things that didn't really matter. The host is what mattered. Listening to the host, of course, in that situation. Mary had her objectives in the right order. Jesus, then serving. Martha, although serving is a very good, characteristic and good attribute, in this situation, it was not the right objective in the moment, specifically because the serving action was causing her anxious turmoil and to be troublesome and to be distracted. Really, it's that word distracted there that connects me back to our land objectives. When we don't prioritize what is truly important and aligns with our values that we want for our land, with our family, we get distracted with temptations that are out there, especially with all these different fancy emerging markets that are coming up. Many of them are fantastic, and I believe every emerging market and program is right for somebody, but they are not right for everybody. And so it is so important for you to be able to filter what is right for you and remove the distractions. Because I believe that if Martha did say prioritize what was most important, one, obviously listen to Jesus, but perhaps there were some other host-like activities she wanted to get done. She could say getting the food ready and making sure the table was clean. She didn't necessarily have to do all of the serving characteristics and actions needed. She could have prioritized making food, sitting at the table, and listening. That, I think, would have greatly reduced her anxiousness, her distractedness, and the turmoil and trouble that she felt like she was having inside. But instead, she was trying to do it all and then got frustrated with her sister, of course, who did have her priorities and was acting on a very singular objective priority for her and what was right for her. Again, we do the same thing in our own land. When we don't prioritize our objectives, we chase too many things and we get distracted with quote unquote much serving. And we never actually meet our goals and values. We get frustrated with our foresters. We get frustrated with the program enrollments, which probably take forever. If they're anything like government paperwork, you got stacks and stacks of paperwork. You're trying to fill it all out. Then you get into it and you might get distracted with a different thing. Or you're frustrated now because perhaps that program restricts you in your future opportunities that you decided that, okay, that sounds like a good option. You try to do that, but they conflict and now you can't, simply because in the very beginning you didn't prioritize what you were trying to get done on the land. So, how can you actually prioritize your objectives? What can you do today? And what I actually want you to go through and do today to make sure that your objectives are prioritized and making sure that you do have some type of priority and not trying to meet everything at the exact same time. The first thing, of course, is creating that why factor, that thing that I talked about at the beginning of this episode that I talk about so many times. You need to make sure you understand what is that why that you are keeping this land? What is that why, that vision, that purpose? And I'm talking about not just like timber income, I want retirement money. It needs to be very specific to you and it needs to be very motivating for when things get hard, helps you get through those rough patches. So you need to create your why factor. And if you don't know how to do that, I have several episode podcasts on that I do share a little bit more detail of how you create your why factor. I think it's episode 2 actually that says creating a why. And you can go listen to that to figure out how to create that. But after you have that why factor, then I want you to go through a variety of hypothetical situations that you have to say this or that. And what you're trying to figure out is what are you willing to give up to achieve something else? So, for example, it could be a timber harvesting during deer season, lose max revenue from timber, lose pole markets or pole values, something like that. That's just one example. It could be I would rather do logging and lose one season of deer hunting versus wait another year for reforestation. It could be I would rather have straight roads or curvy winding roads. Just go through a variety of different hypothetical situations, and your answers, after you look at all those final answers, are going to really kind of help show you what is more important. Now, I've done an objective clinic in the past. I think it's been about maybe 2.5, maybe 3 years. This was very, very early on in the Landed Ladies season and growing a business that I actually did this type of clinic. It was a 3-hour clinic of defining objectives, going through, and then we actually went through a hypothetical situation. But I've been thinking about doing another objectives clinic, and I would really love, is that something you would want to do to help you go through these different hypotheticals and truly make sure that you have the right prioritization of your objectives, or maybe for the very first time, actually create a priority list of your different objectives to make sure they do truly align with your why factor. So if you're interested in that type of clinic, shoot me an email at landedladies@gmail.com, or just again message me on social media and say objectives clinic, or just yes, objectives, something along those lines. And that way I know, hey, that is something you are actually interested in, and I will make sure to create this type of event specifically with you in mind. But if not, what I still want you to do today is write on that list of paper those 5 different objectives: timber income, wildlife, recreation, aesthetics, and soil and water conservation, and start making sure and trying to list out how your priority of objectives are for your family, land, and situation. When you do it, also send me a photo. I would love to see what your priorities are, or just again, tell me your list of priority objectives, because I love to see how you are taking action on your property from your land, and especially after you listen to a podcast, steps that you are taking to actually take them into action. So send that to me. I love to hear from you. Until next week.